Hello, this is Padma Kuppa, State Representative for Troy and Clawson. I represent Michigan's 41st House District, and I'm honored to have here with me someone who I've been friends with for a number of years, Rabbi Aura Ahuvia. We met in Troy. Someone introduced us electronically, and we met at a restaurant in Troy that was started by two young Jewish men. And the conversation started there and has never stopped. It's always ongoing. She and her husband have spent time with me and my family at one of our holy days at the Parthia Temple. And we have been honored to be part of her congregation when they celebrated various events, including Yom HaShoah, a very important day for the Jewish people. Both of us are inspired by our personal faith to do good in the world. And I'm really honored to have Rabbi Aura here. Would you like to say a few words about yourself, Aura, as we start this conversation on faith and politics, policy that puts people first?
Sure, Padma, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I want to say what both an honor and a pleasure it is to be able to do this podcast with you. I became a rabbi as more or less mid-career change because how to encapsulate it? Because I just thought the world needed more music, more opportunity to build community with each other, and I could see where I could play a role in facilitating both of those things. So now that my husband and I live down in Ann Arbor, we're still very much attached to our local community and seeking to explore the ways in which we can make a contribution to make the community a little bit better. So thank you for having me.
So one of the questions that I always start off on our Faith and Politics podcast is to discuss the concept of Seva, something that I believe in the Sanskrit, it means selfless service. It's the underlying principle of my own desire to help others. I have come to public service as a result of this, and I have introduced several pieces of legislation, especially motivated by this desire to help others and to protect vulnerable adults from online sexual predators or providing paid sick leave. Something that the legislature actually gutted in 2018 here in Michigan. But I know that in the Jewish tradition, there is this concept of tikkun olam, but also that you have much more knowledge than I do about the concept of service in the Jewish tradition. Can you speak to how your faith informs this desire to serve?
Yeah, sure. There are many different approaches within Jewish tradition that give us a framework for understanding both the imperative to make a contribution and how to make that, how to shape it. And one of them, as you mentioned, is tikkun olam, which is Hebrew for repair the world. It is a concept that comes from Jewish mystical tradition and talks about how there is holiness everywhere and in all things. And part of the motivation behind tikkun olam is to do the work to uncover the hidden holiness that resides everywhere, because when we do that, we make our own little repair to whatever we give our attention to. And of course, the interpretations for that are vast. Tikkun olam as a concept can be applied to working with the unhoused in shelters, helping feed people who don't have enough to eat, because we're helping them gain access to their innate holiness and helping them get on their feet. So it works that way. It can also work in the environment. There are so many ways in which pollution sort of puts a cover and a coating on that which wants to live and breathe free, our trees, our animals. And so tikkun olam can be applied to the environment as well. There are a couple of other concepts, I think, that are also my guiding lights when I think about this. One of them is it's a phrase that comes from Torah, which is the Hebrew Bible, the first 5 books of Moses. And that phrase is tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. The word tzedek is the Hebrew word for justice. And the phrase tzedek, tzedek, tirdof means justice, justice shall you pursue. Over the millennia, commentators have wondered, why does this word tzedek appear 2 times? Why not just say tzedek tirdof? That would be sufficient. And because the assumption is there is no extraneous or extra word in Torah, every word is there for a reason and with intention, the interpretation of the repetition of that word has been, well, it's been manifold. But one interpretation that I like a lot is there are 2 kinds of tzedek. There's the tzedek of the inward, and there's the tzedek of the outward. So we should work to ensure that we're doing justice within ourselves, and then we can apply the justice to the world. That's one interpretation. I've also, another interpretation that I really love that I'll just add is that it's not enough to just want justice in a passive kind of a way. Like, oh yeah, that's one of my values. That's one of my ideals, without working for it. The fact that it's repeated means justice is an ideal, but justice means you must actively pursue it, not just sit back and passively want it. So tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. And interestingly, this root word tzedek, justice, is at the root of the word tzedakah, which is the Hebrew word for charity. So when we're sharing of our wealth, of our abundance, we're bringing justice out into the world. And that's a core Jewish concept of charity.
And I'm going to jump in saying that is yet another beautiful concept that we have within that's co-relatable between the Hindu and Jewish traditions, in that when we talk about the human life and what is our obligation, the 4-fold pursuit, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Dharma comes first. Dharma is the Hindu word that we translate into justice. It's Sanskrit, but also used in many other languages, pronounced slightly differently. But dharma is justice. And the second pursuit, so we first must pursue justice. Second, we must pursue artha, which is financial well-being or economic well-being or prosperity, right? And so dharma comes before artha. So when we pursue our economic needs and fulfill our economic obligations and responsibilities, we must do so in a just way. So when we talk about, and my headline this morning was about the lithium mining that's happening around the world and the harm that's being done to the environment. But we need to also have electric vehicles, and electric vehicles need lithium for batteries. And so, dharma comes before artha. So yes, we need to manufacture cars and we need to make money. And this is why I came to Michigan, to be part of the auto industry. However, we must do so with justice. And so are we being just to the planet? And so dharma, artha, kama, and then also to fulfill our desires or our ambitions. So we don't look at that as something negative. And then the final is to find union with God, to find moksha, because we believe in this concept of birth and rebirth. But I want to take something that, going back to this idea of legislation that puts people first. We are often seen as the model minority as Indian Americans. And
it's a lot to live up to.
Yeah. And I think the Jewish community also carries some of that same baggage. And so one of the things that I always talk about is, wealth, how much of wealth is enough. But we also know that in our Constitution, I know that in the Bible, in the New Testament, there's James chapter 5, verse 1 talks about wealth and acquisition of wealth and what happens to those who seek too much wealth. But there's always this issue of balanced budgets and how we rob Peter to pay Paul. It's a very Christian concept. But it really explains what we need to do to keep our budget balanced in our state, because that is a requirement by our state constitution. What does that mean for people of faith? Because I know, like in the Muslim tradition, you're not supposed to borrow money. One of my good friends, Mansoor, buys all his things cash down, does not hold, credit card. I know a Hindu I know doesn't want to possess a credit card because many of these credit card companies are doing things to harm the planet. Monks from the BAPS tradition don't want to touch money, are actually free from touching money, and so the people around them take care of money. But what does it mean in the Jewish tradition for in the Jewish faith? What is your relationship to wealth and inequity? And what are we asking when we have this? We have increasing inequity in our country, and so how do we talk about that in the Jewish tradition?
Such a sticky and rich question. I love the question, and it's such a practical application of the very values that I think all sacred texts seek to address. Because I think it's part of the human condition is that inequality arises, and societies, to be fair and just, need to create mechanisms for redistributing wealth and for rebalancing every so often. So I have several different things pop to mind that I'll try to get to. But the first one happens to be just exactly where we are in the annual reading of the Torah. We just happened this week to be reading the part that talks about the Jubilee year and what does that mean. And in Torah, there are all these moments for rebalancing. There's a certain way in which it's recognized that the haves in society will get wealthier and the have-nots will get more indebted to them. And there needs to be just an out for that. There needs to be some way of letting off steam and rebalancing every so often. So every 7 years and then every 50 years, Torah's solution was to set everybody free, to have nobody indebted to or indentured to anybody else, and everybody gets to go back to whatever their ancestral land holdings were, even if they lost it, in a bad bet or whatever. And that's part of how Torah sought to equalize and rebalance things. I think, though, there's a couple other concepts in play, and Jewish tradition, I know it's not alone in this, but part of what keeps it alive and vibrant is we're always taking the core concepts that we find in Torah and then reinterpreting them in a way that can make sense for us today. And so a couple of additional concepts come to mind as I think about your problem. Another one, going back to the concept of tzedek, justice. In connection with tzedek, there is a lot of hay made in Torah about not putting a stumbling block before the blind, about having equal weights in the marketplace, meaning we are not to say, give a little bit of extra to our friend because, they're our friend and we want them to. Justice shall be equal no matter who stands before the court. It doesn't matter if they're wealthy or impoverished. We're all held to account to the same rules, the same laws equally. And so these are the concepts that modern day commentators and interpreters say we have to bring to bear when we're deciding issues about what makes for a just society. And if it seems that things are going in the wrong direction, there is an imperative to rebalance, and rebalance for the sake of tzedek. Just because wealthy people want to be wealthier is not a reason to indulge that. And it's really crucial that we be able to step back, step away from everybody's natural inclination to just want more because it's more, and look at the society as a whole with compassion to say, what would be in everybody's collective best interest? What would lead to collective well-being? I feel like I remember a study way, way back out of Minnesota somewhere that talked about the impact of public parks and public forests being accessible to everybody as having an outsized positive impact on people from poorer communities, because they could go to those parks and their kids could play there, and between making new friends at those parks and having access to nature and of course the great benefits of nature, people who had less access to that were benefited more greatly, and that accrued 30, 40 years later to a net benefit for the people of the larger community there. That's the kind of thinking that I think Torah is inviting us to hold. There's one last thing I wanted to say. I know I'm talking a lot, but that is it. In my view, I don't think I'm speaking for Jewish tradition here, but I will speak as, a rabbi and a Jewish person. Money is simply energy. Money is simply a symbol of energy. And where do we want to put our energy? What values do we want to drive that energy? And we can pour our energy into making our communities better and making the world a nicer, kinder place. Or we can choose to ignore all that. And that's a value decision as well. So money's energy. That's it.
So I actually have what you were saying triggered my memory of one of my favorite essays that I have ever read that really hit my soul. It was written as part of an NPR initiative around 10, 12 years ago called This I Believe. It was actually an essay, a series that I think was done many years ago, but then NPR sort of reinvigorated that in the late 2000s. And in 2008, I think Kenneth Feinberg, he's an attorney and a mediator, he's Jewish. He was asked to, he had the value of placing a value on human life because he was in charge of calculating the different amounts of compensation for each and every victim of the 9/11 attack.
Oh, yes.
And he said that our system of justice is always based on this idea that compensation for death should be directly related to the financial circumstances of each victim. But he began to question this premise of the legal system. So, and he had a conflict because of his belief in the equality of all life, especially when someone came to him and said, Mr. Feinberg, my husband was a fireman and died a hero at the World Trade Center. Why are you giving me less money than the banker who represented Enron? Why are you demeaning the memory of my husband?
Wow.
Right? And so, the standard legal argument would be that he's not evaluating the intrinsic moral worth of any individual. His decision was based on law and legal, but, grieving families don't want to hear that. And so he really, and then he did it again in the wake of the Virginia Tech shootings. And so I think it's really important to remember that in the eyes of God, we are all equal, whatever tradition we come from. I think that's true. When I say namaste, I bow to the divinity within you. But for the grace of God, there go I. That's very, very important, I think, in our common space that we have. So I do serve on the tax policy committee, and we have a lot of things we've talked a lot about justice and fairness. But I also want to talk about action. And this is something that, how do we put our faith into action? And this is something that actually in the Hindu tradition, we have this idea that you can do dhyana yoga. We talk about yoga and we don't mean downward dog, right? We mean, or the positions that that is hatha yoga, but yoga, it's actually controlling the thought waves of the mind. That is the essential. But to get there, you go through different phases and different paths. And one of the paths is dhyana yoga, which is meditation. Is something that I enjoy doing, and it helps me as I deal with all the partisan politics of Lansing. But another one is karma yoga, which is a yoga of action, and how I've always felt tikkun olam is akin to karma yoga. That, you know, Rabbi Heschel, when he marched on Sabbath and people questioned him, he said, "I'm praying with my feet."
Yes.
Do you want to speak to that idea? I'm sure you have something that you'd like to comment on that.
Yes, I'm just, forgive me. Here we are. Yeah, forgive me. I had to run to my bookshelves because as you were talking, I was inspired and I wanted to find a particular prayer that I think about every time. Here it is. It's the call to prayer. In Jewish tradition, traditional services are sort of structured very nearly all the same, which is to say there's a certain warm-up period as people are trickling in, various songs, psalms that get sung. And then once there's a critical mass there, the entire community gathers together around unifying prayer, known in Hebrew as the Barchu, which harkens to both blessing and bending of the knee. It's a call to communal prayer. It's an acknowledgement of the collective that we're all a part of. And it's a reminder that we, to a certain extent, even though we enter a sanctuary, a sacred space with our individual needs, we also, for our own well-being and our own good, are called to carry those lightly so that there's space and room to include each other's needs in our collective prayers when we enter into prayer. And one of the modern interpretations of the Barchu that I love so much, and I've led many a time when I've been leading services, is this. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. And our blessing, not blessing as a noun, but the action of our blessing. It's hearing blessing as a gerund, like going swimming or walking or running. Our blessing gives us strength and makes our visions clear. And our blessing gives us peace and the courage to dare. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. And it's this very idea that you're talking about, this notion of giving to the collective and knowing that there's a receiving there in giving. And there's sort of a certain measure of faith that's required in doing that. And faith is knowing that as we give, we are making room to receive, sort of like breathing in and breathing out.
Very powerful words, very, very inspiring. I'm going to pivot for a moment because we are getting close to the end of our podcast today. I think that you and I share, we've lived outside of Michigan, and we've made Michigan our home, and we're very fortunate that we have the world's largest freshwater ecosystem here. It's one of those things that kept me here. I came for the cars, but I stayed for the lakes, as I tell people. When I was in seminary at ETS, I remember hearing a lot about creation care and how one can push the message of protecting our environment and addressing the issues around climate change through our own faith. I see my own vegetarianism as one way of doing that. And I know that there are other ways through other faith traditions to honor the planet that we share with one another and to protect it for generations to come. And I know you also have a similar frame of mind and mindset and interest in that. Do you want to just speak to that particular ideal within the Jewish tradition?
Absolutely. And I thank you so much for the opportunity, because personally speaking, this is an area of passion for me personally. I think there's been a resurgence of care for the environment in Jewish thinking and in Jewish action. I'm just seeing it across the board, even amongst what they call the unchurched, the people who choose to not affiliate, who tend to skew younger. The passion for caring for the environment is absolutely there. And there are new programs taking place to educate people around what are the values that we can bring to bear to care for the environment. I think in Torah, one of the places we turn to is the creation story itself, and just noticing how the human being, which in Hebrew is Adam, where we get the name Adam, but really it just means human, or earthling. Adam comes from Adama, earth. So we have the same in English. An earthling is made of earth, and Adam is made of Adama. And so there's sort of a recognition already in the language itself that we are of the earth. We belong to the earth. And there's been a lot of interpretations, many of them, I will readily admit, poor ones, of God's words, God's charge to Adam to spread across the earth. A lot of people interpret that to mean dominate and take at will. And by my lights, and really by the lights of many, many, many greater thinkers than me, that's a poor interpretation that we've discovered is not only serving us ill, but is actually causing us as a human species to slowly kill ourselves. You know, if we don't change, I believe in hundreds or thousands of years, we will kill ourselves and life around us. It is not tenable to live as we currently are living in terms of the resources we're taking and not replenishing, but also the ways in which we're polluting and treating the pollution as if it's not going to come back to us, because it is. It is coming back to us, all of it. I think
definitely is coming back to us, as we know from the PFAS problems that Michigan has,
Oh,
that so many of us are trying to address.
Oh, it just goes on and on. I think the time is now to begin to see ourselves as guardians and not warriors of the planet. I've heard this terminology applied to policing, and I like it in terms of how we see ourselves in relation with the earth too. Guardians and not warriors, not destroyers. When I think about modern day kashrut, which is how Jews keep kosher, it's traditionally associated with eating only kosher meat and keeping meat and dairy separate. My personal practice, and I'm pretty far out there, I will say, I'm pretty eccentric in how I practice kashrut personally, but my personal practice is to seek to maximize food purchases. So I'm speaking too highfalutin a way, is to buy foods that are in alignment with good farming practices. That's a better way to put it. So buying organic means that it came from land that farmers did not apply pesticides to, which is good for the earth itself, because we know that microbes and insects are all part of a larger ecosystem. And when everything is in correct balance, there's enough for everyone. And we don't need to kill certain pests, which goes down the food chain. And what's more, that's better for the farmers because they don't have to apply pesticides that put their own health at risk. And there are many ways of applying that kind of a principle. I'm fortunate to live in Ann Arbor that just passed as part of its A20 plan, which is a plan to have zero emissions by, I think, 2035. I'm not sure about that. To put a special value on preserving the tree canopy, so that as new parcels of land are sold, the canopy itself comes to be part of the value of the land. And I personally think, like, if we could simply value, and I think Ann Arbor A20 already does this, if we could value trees such that every say 10 years older a tree is, and you can measure it by measuring how wide around the trunk is, tax another, say, $10,000 onto the value of that tree. And that's what people would have to, like, let's say a starting value to cut down a tree for somebody who wants to buy a plot of land, a developer, starts at $100,000 and then goes up in $10,000 increments for every additional, however much larger that tree is, however much older. I feel like it's time for the economy to value and cherish trees as part of a way of preserving land. But anyway, in Jewish tradition, trees are sort of seen as an ideal for humans to strive toward. The Eitz HaSadeh, the tree of the field, is sort of a central part of the ecosystem. And of course, we think of the central tree in the Garden of Eden. And Jewish tradition has so valued trees as it has valued Torah that we liken the Torah to a tree. We call it the tree of life. So that's a little bit of me mixing it up with
No, it ties in with some of the policies that we have happening from our executive branch on down, and from what I've done when you were in Troy as a rabbi, and when I was a planning commissioner in Rabbi in Troy. As a planning commissioner, one of the first things that I was part of was to craft language that the city council passed so that developers didn't just come in and clear cut the trees.
Yes.
And that there was a tree protection ordinance associated with development. The governor, not only did she last year pledge to make Michigan carbon neutral by 2050, in 2021, she said that the state facilities will all run on renewables by 2025. And I'm part of a group of legislators, bipartisan group of legislators that have encouraged the governor to sign on to or commit to making Michigan one of the 30 by 30 states, where we will protect 30% of our land, 30% of our water by 2030. It's a pledge, I think, that's really important. And bringing it back to something that in the legislature that I'm planning to introduce later this term is a ban on neonics. We talk about insects and pesticides. Neonics or neonicotinoids is the full form. There are certain neonics that the European Union has banned because they kill bees. Bees are so essential in pollination and in farming. It's so essential to have, be cautious about the pesticides that we use. And so I'm working with a variety of stakeholders. It reminds me a lot of interfaith dialogue, different people, different perspectives, but we want to do common good, want to work for the common good. And so I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Faith and Politics. And I thank Rabbi Aura Ahuvia for joining me, and to all of you listening, thank you so much. Salom, salam, peace, shanti.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was an honor.